All right, it looks like we're getting to a quorum. We've got 35 increasing. As I'm looking through the guest list here, do we have any new members? Anybody here for the first time? Speak up. I don't actually see any new names, so we may not have any new people yet. But if you see somebody that point them out to me, and otherwise we're going to get going here. Welcome to our April meeting, and again we are progressing. We're almost out of this pandemic quagmire, and starting to feel like we're going to get build up some momentum. We're still targeting our looks like our July meeting for our first face-to-face. Today, we're going to be kind of following the formats that we followed in the past. We'll have our reports. We'll have a brief little video from National. I think we've already done that. I do have some input, and I don't know if Rod's is on the phone yet, but Mr. Gizmo report, talk about projects, upcoming programs. We've got Jake Schultz, who's going to cover the Aerocar project. And with that, actually, go back. For those of you, I think everybody kind of knows the drill now. And boy, you guys are really, really good. Almost everyone's already muted their microphone. And I think I can see how everyone's status. And if I see that you're making noise, I do have the option of muting you, and don't have to do it very often. And so the idea is that we still want to be have an active meeting, and we want to be able to ask questions and talk. So just unmute your microphone, make your comment, ask your question, and then remute again. Now we also have over here a chat room. And so if you want, you can send me a chat, and we'll keep an eye open on the chat to see, because that maybe mean you can't squeeze in a word sideways, and so feel free to use the chat as well. I always use this as a comparison. It's kind of like being the pattern, and the pattern is full. You've kind of got to listen for everyone else to finish, speak up, and kind of work your way in. So it is kind of hard, and I understand that, and it's not always possible to avoid stepping on other people. But so far, we've done a really, really good job of being respectful for everyone. So we're just going to continue that. Already mentioned the chat window. And yeah, and guess what? We've done this. I think we're celebrating a year that we've been doing these video meetings now, and really, I think we all have to pat ourselves on the back. It's pretty amazing that we've been able to be as successful as we have been, and we're going to continue on with that.
Back as soon as I can get that.
All right. Okay, so going on to the reports, and we'll lead off with the Secretary Treasurer report. John or Rich, who's gonna? Actually, that's supposed to be 183, so we're up 6. Have to go in and make a quick edit on the report. We have new data. Should have done that earlier. John, you want to cover membership?
Yeah. Where did I go? So we've got that new edit makes it 183 regular voting members, 26 life, 7 student members. That's kind of in flux. 17 family members, 3 honorary members that I need to add to that list. That makes the total voting members 215, and we have 30 expired members that would like to get back.
Actually, John, I think I misled you because I think it's 216. And I just want to say thanks to everybody who's been really good about getting your membership renewal. If you kind of look at where we're at here in April, we're kind of about at our November number. And usually it takes us half a year or more to get back up there. Last year, you can see that we didn't cross the 200 threshold until August, and we're already well above that. So thanks again to everyone who made that happen. Vince, you had a couple things you wanted to talk about.
I'm back. Sorry. I'm sort of I'm a caregiver these days, so I do a little running around occasionally. There it is. Yes. The welcome to the well-hung hangar. We now have all three of our mock-ups up. Kristen's Sky is in the back, and the project is pretty much complete. I have a little more to do with. I'm going to roll them a little bit, but that's about it. So bring your friends and whatever and amaze them. This is going to be I'm going to be there a while. I think it was so difficult to put up. I don't think we're going to be taking it down right away. And I'd like to really thank the people who helped. It was Dave Ullman's idea. He started the whole thing. So he helped pull on the ropes and all that. Denny Furman, and I'm trying to think of who else was there. Kind of got lost a little bit. Steve Wheat.
The other Vincent.
Yeah, Vincent Dunn, fellow who's been active around quite a bit lately.
Who were and how about the youth who participated?
The youth was Kristen.
Kristen and her dad did it all?
Yes.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everyone. Looks great.
And like I said, Denny Furman, trying to think of who. There was a couple of others, but I was up on the lift and kind of, hanging on for dear life most of the time. So. And
we are going to write this up. We're going to get an article both for the our newsletter, but we're going to probably submit it for the national newsletter as well. So kind of an interesting project. I don't think you'll see, many of these at other EAA hangars.
Probably not. Yeah. So the next thing is the facility itself. All of you guys who were working in that hangar, it's beginning to look a little bit. There's a lot of junk in there and something. We need to do a general cleanup. There's projects that have been started and maybe finished. I don't know, but there's a lot of remnants left, like the 172 engine rebuild, things like that. A lot of stuff laying around. We need to get that. We need to get that pickup. It's beginning to accumulate and look like my hangar, which is not something you should aspire to. In the shop, we had someone got a drill bit stuck in the new chuck in the new Powermatic drill press. The only thing I have to say about that is that you don't have to tighten those with all the strength that you can muster, because if you do, and it's a large drill and you drill something that's just really hard, really tough, they tend to tighten up some more, and then it's really stuck because you've used all your strength to get it in there. You can't get it out. So we end up having to use wrenches on it, and that's what killed the last one. So moderate that a little bit, if you will. Otherwise, things are just humming along, and we look forward to seeing you in the facility.
Thanks, Vince. Appreciate that. Dave, anything on youth, or do you want me to just go ahead and go to Ray?
No, other than the upcoming Young Eagles in June, there's nothing else to report.
Debbie? Ray Scholarship? You're muted.
For the Ray Scholarship, the process and development of the fourth scholarship, that is the essay questions and the interview questions, is in process. And we'll ask for the essays to be submitted in May, and we'll begin the interviews in June. So this is our fourth scholarship, worth $10,000 for a private certificate.
Deb, and just, I don't know, as far as I know, we're the only chapter who's got 4 scholarships. There are some who have 3, but I think we're the only one that has 4. And so, we're on a great run right here. And what's really important for us is to make sure that these scholars are that they finish, that they complete, that they get done and get their licenses and stuff. So Deb and Mike Ryer before her, did a great job kind of shepherding this, and we have to continue on. We got to make sure these students complete.
Exactly. And as I talked about in the board meeting, that mentoring comes from all of us in small ways of saying, hey, you're doing a great job, hang in there. I know studying for the written exam is difficult. Yep, you're really nervous about taking that check ride. To the people who make sure that the money is paid. And so we all play a part in mentoring. And interesting enough, it was very clear to me in the video, the Zoom meeting actually that we had from National, that if we have a candidate that doesn't finish, we don't look so good about receiving another scholarship. So it's really important for us to shepherd these kids along.
Thanks, Deb. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along, Mike Short, he is not with us. He's actually working today. He did say that, thanks to everyone who continues to support the BMC and the IMC meetings. It's still going along very, very well. And we're going to be looking forward to getting those things back in person again here in the next couple months. And I do have an update from our national here, and I'm hoping, you know what, I may stop sharing because I think I maybe didn't include the audio, which means I have to go do something slightly different. All right, I will be joining back again. Share screen, include audio. There we go, and share. Should be able to see my screen again, and from current slide. Let's try this one more time.
Welcome to this month's Chapter Video Magazine. I'm Charlie Becker, Director of Home Builders and Chapters here at EAA. And if you're like many chapters, you've been kind of in a hibernation mode during this whole COVID period. Well, the vaccines are rolling out, AirVenture's 150 days away. It's time to start getting some events on the board. The weather's going to start turning for those of you in the north half of the country or Texas. So I would suggest that you pick a date, get it on the calendar for your first real event with guests, where you invite people in and you get some activity going in the local community. And a great opportunity for this is either hosting a Flying Start event or doing something around International Young Eagles Day. Now, Flying Start coincides with our EAA Learn to Fly Day on May 15th. And if you hold a Flying Start event in either May or June, we will provide your chapter with 2 free weekly wristbands to AirVenture that you can do with what you choose. And the only requirement is that you use the flyingstart.org registration program that we provide and have at least 5 guests that participate in your program. The other great date to target is International Young Eagles Day. That's going to be June 12th. So I think, when you look out into the future, that'd be a nice time of the year to get, have your first event with guests. And I can't think of a better way to do that than on International Young Eagles Day. And as a little incentive to get your chapter Young Eagle program going again, we're offering double Young Eagle credits for June, July, and August of this year. What that means is instead of your chapter getting $5 for every Young Eagles flight, you're going to get $10, which is awesome. And if that's not some incentive to get moving again, I don't know what is. The only requirement is that you get all the paperwork turned in by no later than September 30th. And I'd strongly encourage you to use the Young Eagles registration tool that we provide, because that'll make, if you haven't used it as a chapter, it'll make everything easier. And that way you'll get your paperwork turned in even easier to headquarters. Now, we do also have a chapter leadership training opportunity I want to call out. We are doing a webinar on food service in today's world, which will address serving food in the current climate and what are the best practices. And that's going to be done by the head of our food service here at EAA, Ryan Rasmussen, and that will be March 24th. So I would encourage you to tune in, see what kind of the current state of food service is right now, what are the best practices to keep everybody safe. Now, I mentioned AirVenture is just 150 days away. I am super excited. If you haven't figured out, I can't wait. I feel like I was cheated last year by not having AirVenture. But we are looking for some volunteers in the Blue Barn, which is the home of Young Eagles and Chapters. So if you're going to be here and you have a little bit of time to volunteer, send us an email and let us know, and we'll be in contact with you to discuss what the opportunities are. So we look forward to seeing you in July.
So just to comment on that, we have put our chapter name in for one of the slots for a pancake breakfast at Oshkosh. And so if we were selected, and it's a random process, we would need to come up with about a dozen people to volunteer for that day. So we will find out whether or not we've been selected in May. And so if we are, I'm going to be coming around and trying to get people to commit for working that pancake breakfast. I think we've got enough people going at one time or another, but we would need a little help from you.
Mike, Paul Franklin here. I'll commit to that. Gretchen and I will both be there with our RV.
Okay, I'll put you down on the list. Thanks, Paul. Paul, okay. Excellent. Okay, I'm not going to call on Chuck. Chuck, we got an approval to update the simulator. He's still getting some of the information back from Elite, so hopefully we'll have some more information on that next month. And I put off Mr. Gadget or Mr. Gizmo last month, and because he wasn't there, but I'm going to go ahead and run it this month. It's kind of an interesting tool, and it's something that I think I want to get, and maybe some of you've already got it. So enjoy his little program here.
Welcome. I've got something for Mr. Gizmo, and you're going to like it. This 2000 lumen floodlight. My gosh, is it cool or what? This has a solid LED panel. The side ones are individual, and there are 12 LEDs in each side. Boy, talk about a fun light. Let's look at this light right here. Got a great handle and a on and off button right here, which gives you, if you look at the side of the airplane, a bright light and a dimmer light, and then off. It has a charging port on the back here for your telephones or a device. On this side, you have the main charging port and 4 LED lights that tell you when the total unit is charged. Let's look at the features. I told you about the on and off switch here. That goes for all 3 lights. But look at this. It's an individual light switch for this unit. So if I want to, I can just turn that on and move it up and down, or this direction, or come back and turn it off. Wow. And that's identical for the other side. It slides off this track right here, has 2 charging pins in there, which connect to the bottom of the unit. And in addition, there are magnets. If I want to, I can go ahead and put this right over here, and voila, it's connected. And you could do this on most cars, but not airplanes. So let's put this back on. You saw me take that off and slide around. But what I didn't show you is on the back side of each one of these lights is a USB. And you can individually charge the unit in a local pub, if you want, off a device that has a power pack, if you want to at home individually, or in your car on the accessory tray. And you can use this individually, and if you only need one. If you're camping, you can use it there. If you need a flashlight outside, you can just use one. It's really, really handy. Let me go ahead and put this cord away. Let's talk about this feature right here. It's a lock, unlock on the position of the light. So if you want to, you can mount this on the bottom of a tripod in your workshop, and then lock it in position, as well as turn one up and one down, and then have your lights going. Here's the mounting bolt screw in for the bottom of the unit. So you're going to Oshkosh or Sun and Fun. This is a light to bring along, or just one or two of the individual spotlights. I know you all are wondering, how bright is this? Well, I've turned on the lights, set the unit on the wing of my RV9A, and I'm coming over to the light switch and turn off the overhead lights, and voila. It really lights up the hangar quite well. Let's go over and pick up the unit itself. Well, look at that. I have it in my hand, and it's pretty much lighting up my hangar quite well, no matter where I point it. So there you have it. The surprising part of all of this is you can buy this locally at Costco. Not only Costco, are you ready for the price? I was really surprised. $39. That's right, $39 for the gem of a light. You heard it from Mr. Gizmo, Costco, Salem, Oregon, $39. Enjoy the flashlight. I am.
I don't know if he gets commission on these things that he promotes or not, but I do appreciate him putting these things together. And we're still working out getting the resolution and the size. You know, he's doing all this on his iPhone, so it can be a little bit challenging. Moving ahead. Oh, by the way, there was a couple chats in the chat room, and the question was asked, do you have to be vaccinated to go to Oshkosh? And Aaron Kiefer responded, not for AirVenture. It is not going to be required. They have said that they're still sorting out what the post-COVID procedures are going to be, what the social distancing is going to be. We're still months away, and a lot can happen between now and then. So thanks for the questions and thanks for the response. And that actually is going to come up to, we'll talk a little bit about COVID as we get into our upcoming programs too. Again, putting in a plug for the newsletter, and Rich needs information, articles, stories, tales, trips, photos, anything that you could submit. Hopefully get those to him about the 18th or 19th. It's always our goal to put the newsletter out on the 20th, and always looking for good content.
Maybe if anybody has
go ahead,
Oshkosh plan you want to share, that'd be a good article.
Yeah, and some of us are fortunate enough to maybe go to Sun and Fun. I'm hoping that maybe I might be able to get a couple of photos from Sun and Fun while I'm down there. I think Jerry's going to be there. I'll be there. Not sure who else from the group will be. Okay, chapter projects. Still, we have a couple of RV6s, and I think we're going to start talking about those a little bit more as we come out of the COVID period. Everything else, I'm probably going to clean off this screen since it's getting to be kind of old news at this point. Where we're at with the programs, we've got Jake Schultz, who's going to talk about the Aerocar and his book about the Aerocar today. Next month, there had been a request, would we consider doing an in-person meeting in May? The board, we talked about it, and apparently that the numbers for COVID are going up in the local counties, and it's still considered a bit of a hot zone. So we're going to err on the side of caution. We will just have a video meeting in May. June is going to be Young Eagles. That'll be our first face-to-face event, and hopefully we'll be getting pilots and volunteers to support that and have a great Young Eagles event. Really looking forward to that. And then July will be our first in-person meeting at the clubhouse. The focus will be light flight. We're still figuring out who our speaker is going to be, and we've got a couple of other presenters on deck, and some others that we're considering. Jerry and I are working on filling out the schedule for the rest of the year. A lot of this, the August meeting will coincide with the fly-in, and we're still working out the details on the fly-in. Hopefully next month we'll be able to give you kind of an update on that as those details progress. It looks like we're going to do something. We're not sure if it's a one-day format, two-day format. We're just all the details are still being worked out. I can say that Steve Wheat, who I don't think is on the call, has stepped up to lead the fly-in portion, and I saw Tim Isaac joined us, and he is helping out on the Stoll side of it. And so more details to come is all I can say. That would probably be our August meeting. Okay, return. And with that, we're a few minutes behind schedule, but I'd like to introduce our fellow chapter member. Jake Schultz is up there on the screen, just unmuted himself. And I have Jake's slides here, so he's going to be prompting me along the way to advance and so forth. Jake, do you want to take questions if they come up throughout the presentation, or you want people to hold their questions to the end? How'd you like to do this?
Oh, I would be glad to take something, as if someone sees something that jogs their curiosity and they want to unmute and ask a question. I'm good with that.
Perfect.
I'd hate to get all the way to the end and say, oh man, a third of the way into the pitch, I had a question, but I forgot what it was.
Hey, and by the way, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do see Ron Sturba down there, Mr. Gizmo. So thanks for doing the presentation, Ron. I didn't see you on there earlier, so thanks again for your videos. They're always good. Okay, Jake, have at it, and tell me when to proceed.
Okay, so I apologize for the next thing. I'm using a tablet to present, so I don't really have a good way to advance, and so Michael will take care of that. So go ahead. So we'll draw back the curtain. I always thought that's a cheesy, cheap way to do it, but anyway. So I'm going to talk about Molt Taylor and his Aerocar. Now, I'm not sure if Wayne Nooch is on the call, but he has flown the Aerocar probably more than anyone, I was told. Just about more hours in an Aerocar than anyone. But he is a local gentleman here. A lot of you know him. I have not yet met him, but apparently he's flown the Aerocar a lot. And I would welcome his input either during this pitch or at some point later. But there is a very, very local connection here to the Aerocar here at the EAA chapter at Independence. So this photo you're seeing is one of the earliest flights of the Model 3 Aerocar. And so what we're going to do is we're going to step through time. We're going to talk about how Molt came up with the idea and then developed the Aerocar. We'll look at some of the alternatives and the designs he looked at but never was able to build. And then we'll give a little bit of a recap on sort of where some of them are now. If you have any questions, let me know. Basically, this was a career of passion with Molt Taylor, and it was really fun. I got to know Molt Taylor because I was building one of his mini imps. So I went down to meet him. I lived in Seattle at the time, drove down to Vancouver, Longview area, Longview, Washington, where he lived, and met him, and then bought the plans for the mini imp and got to know him. And he was sorting out his archives at the time. And so everything was there in one spot. And I thought, man, somebody should do something. So I stepped up to the table and offered to write a book in collaboration with him. So go ahead. So Molt, M-O-L-T, Molt Taylor, and go ahead. And his vision was to have an airplane that was more useful than a traditional airplane. And so the Aerocar is a flying car, in general considered a flying car, but it's basically an airplane that people can use more often than a traditional airplane. Molt Taylor and I would go for a drive. I knew him about the last 3 years of his life. And we would go for a drive around, and we'd drive past the airport at Longview, and he would just get all incensed. He's like, look at all those airplanes over there. He goes, they're all just sitting there. He goes, and not one of them can drive to the store. You know, and he would say, you got all these Cessnas and Pipers, and they're just sitting there, not being used. So he and his wife, go to the next slide. So he and his wife, Lillian, Molt Taylor, actually, let me back up a little bit. Molt was a pilot, pre-World War II pilot in the Navy. He grew up in Portland, Oregon, and then went into the Navy. And during his time in the Navy, he met Lillian Verneil Gregory, who became his wife, Lillian, who they knew her as Neil Taylor. And so she actually learned and got her pilot's license prior to World War II as well. And they would fly or take a train to the East Coast and fly the Luscombes back from the East Coast and such. So they were really into aviation. And when they would fly, they were living in Southern California at the time. They would fly, but they would get somewhere and they didn't have any way to get from the airport into town. Nowadays, there are rental cars, things are more set up like that, or you have Uber and things like that. But at the time, you would land at the little airport in the middle of nowhere, and you had no way to get into town or continue to go on your business travel and such. So he really wanted to develop a vehicle that could be useful as an airplane, but also would be able to get you into town or take you the rest of the way on your trip. So go ahead. Actually, one more. Go back one more if you could. Okay. All right. So I like to tell stories about the people and who they are And so to get an idea, Molt met his future wife, Lillian, at a party. Yeah, I believe it was a New Year's party. And he said, you know, he met her and then he took her flying every single day for the next 10 days. And he said, I wanted to make sure that she really would love aviation because he knew he loved aviation so much. So literally when he met her, he asked her out and then they went flying every single day for the next 10 days while he was on leave in the Navy. And then she obviously loved aviation. She actually, as I mentioned, got her pilot's license as well. So go ahead. So his idea was to do the Aerocar. So there's 3 slides here. There's this and this and this. And these are some of the earliest sketches of the Aerocar. The concept was always to have a small vehicle that would tow the wings and tail as a trailer. So the vehicle itself is independent. You can choose to park the trailer at the airport and leave it there and drive the car into town, or you could choose to pull the trailer and the wings and tail and take everything with you. And the vehicle always had just, the concept was to have one engine. The engine is in the back, and it would drive the propeller and through a shaft, and it would drive the front wheels through a drivetrain. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So go ahead. So as he began to develop it, he would draw more and more detailed sketches. These are from 1945, and he would build more and more detailed models. Now we actually still have those models. I have those here at the home, but most of this stuff that I will show you and most of the artifacts have been donated to the Museum of Flight in Seattle, and these models are also slated to go to the Museum of Flight someday. And currently, he was talking when he built this first model, and he projected the cost to be $3,000. And Molt would say, boy, were we dreaming. So it was kind of fun to see him look back at his own early work on some of this and just see how much he learned over the years. So go ahead.
Hey, will you talk about the power plant a little bit later?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing they did is World War II had ended. Molt had been drawing these concepts of a flying car, and basically he was trying, after World War II ended, he was going to try to find a job, and his dad told him, well, you know, you've been talking about this flying car all the time. Why don't you, I'll help you. Why don't we find some investors, and we'll take that dream of building a flying car and go for it. And so they found $50,000. There were not 50 investors. Some people bought 6 or 7 shares, and some people just bought 1 share. But they had 50 shares, $1,000 a piece for each share. And then they started Aerocar with that. And the first order of business was to build a building. So they bought some land and built a building in Longview, Washington. And this, you can hit the slide one more time. And so they built a building. And this was architected Larry Rice, who was the architect, and it was the first building in which they built initially the model, the wind tunnel model, and then they built the Aerocars in this small plant. So go ahead. And the first business here, you see, I can zoom in on mine on the screen and read the text.
Yeah, I don't think
here.
I can zoom in.
Yeah, I'm going to zoom here. So it says, the first membership meeting of the Aerocar Associated will be held in the new plant at the Longview Airport at 9 p.m. Thursday, February 19th, 1948. So 1948, World War II shortly after, but they had the building built by that point in time, and they chose to have their very first meeting in February of 1948. So go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah, you gotta be zoomed out to go. So as I mentioned, the first thing they built was a wind tunnel model. The model was tested in the tunnel at the University of Washington. Molt is often listed as an aeronautical engineer. That's not true. He went to the University of Washington and he got a business degree, but he had a real strong interest in aviation, and his background in the Navy had been during World War II to develop pilotless aircraft. So he had a really strong engineering background in the Navy, but he wasn't actually a degreed engineer. The the person actually who ran the wind tunnel tests at that time was a gentleman named Scott Crossfield. And Scott Crossfield had also graduated in the University of Wisconsin, or at least, sorry, I went to Wisconsin. So the University of Washington, Scott Crossfield graduated. He was the first man to fly Mach 2. He was the first man to fly the X-15 rocket plane. And he, after he graduated from college, he worked for a year running the wind tunnel as his job at the University of Washington. And I actually had a chance to talk to him a couple times about it. And there's some good stories there I could tell you at some point as well. He blacked out the power of half the university when he threw the switch wrong and killed shorted out the motor for the wind tunnel and blanked out half the power of the university. So go ahead one more time. So in addition to building the wind tunnel model and getting some data, they held a fly-in at the Longview Airport, and they had, at that point, there was about 9 months after the wind tunnel models, they built the prototype of the car and the wings. The car did not fly yet, but they could drive it around in circles at this fly-in that was held in 1948. So go ahead. Okay, so Molt by no means did this alone. He had a lot of really good people around him. The two women in the upper left were both Boeing employees during World War II, and they were Rosie the Riveters, so to speak. The woman on the left, her nickname was Cookie, and then it's one of her friends as well, and they both worked at Boeing. The gentleman on the right was a local aviation mechanic. His name was Jess Minnick. Jess worked for Molt Taylor for years, for about 30 years, and Molt kept him on the payroll, working on the Aerocar, working on his sport aviation model and such. And Jess was a big factor in this entire equation. Helped out with a lot of the design, built a lot of the parts, and was just really, really a neat part of the whole thing. Always working as an employee, but a big part of Molt's aviation career was Jess Minnick. And then in the lower left, we have the kind of the design department. We have Charlie Kitchell, who was the chief engineer, chief project engineer for Taylorcraft. And then we have Charlie Kitchell, Art Robertson, who was a stress engineer for Lockheed. And then the gentleman on the left is Ken Shaver, and he was a high school student who showed a lot of talent for drafting. And so Molt brought him in, and he was only about 16 at the time. I had a chance to meet Jess Minnick late in his life, and I also had a chance to know and meet Ken Shaver a number of times. He lived at Port Townsend, right down the road from the Air Museum there. So very, very much a local Northwest story here. So go ahead. So when they completed the aircraft to the point where they could taxi it, they did so. They taxied it around. Go ahead. And they actually had the first flight with a guy named George Heinlein, who was the pilot. And in this photo, the lower center photo, Molt Taylor is standing there with a Graflex camera shooting still pictures. And this is a stopped freeze frame taken from a video, a motion picture, actually 8mm motion picture camera that Mrs. Taylor had taken. And so this is Mrs. Taylor taking a picture of Mr. Taylor watching George Heinlein fly the Aerocar in its first flight. And when I first showed this photo to Mrs. Taylor, she just got so upset. And I was like, what's wrong? This is Molt Taylor filming the Aerocar in its first flight. She goes, I know. She goes, and I had to shoot the video, you know. And I said, what? She goes, I was part of the country club, and I won a golf championship. She goes, the only golf tournament I ever won in my entire life. She goes, and I was supposed to go to the country club and get the award, and I couldn't go get the award because I had to be there to help film Molt Taylor in his first flight of the Aerocar. So she got her trophy later, but she was never there to receive the trophy in person because she was there filming the first flight of the Aerocar. So I always think it's kind of funny that the experience of a day can be so different depending on your perspective. So go ahead. So they learned a lot about the Aerocar. In the lower photo and the upper left photo, you can see that the ventral is all the way along the surface of the lower tail fin. It was way too directionally stable. You couldn't turn the aircraft. So in the upper right, they show the modified prototype where they went to a more traditional vertical tail and rudder, and so it was way too stable. George Heinlein had said you couldn't turn it; you had to bank it, pull the elevator, and then straighten it out again. He says so. They even though they had done wind tunnel tests, they had a lot of things to learn as they were building the prototype. So go ahead. Oh, it's starting to rain here in Independence. So I'll keep going quick. This is Mrs. Taylor in the upper left in front of their home in Longview. This is Molt Taylor down in Texas, actually, with the Aerocar. There's a business partnership I'll talk about in a second. And then also the Aerocar is in the upper right. Because Molt was in the Navy, a lot of what he tried to do was military derivatives of the Aerocar. This was the Aerocar. They put it on a trailer. They took it out to Washington, D.C. It was actually in the rotunda of the Pentagon for several days, and I have never found a photo of that. If any of you ever have a photo, I would be really interested in seeing a photo of the Aerocar in the rotunda of the Pentagon. I know it exists. I've never seen it. I've never been able to find it, but if you want to make my day, you could give me a photo of the Aerocar in the rotunda of the Pentagon. So go ahead. So a little bit more about the Aerocar. So the engine, the chat question was on the engine. So the engine is behind the passenger and the pilot. It's two-place, side by side. The engine, it's a front wheel drive. The engine sits behind there. It drives a belt down to a shaft up through the differential and the clutch and such to the front wheels. And that's so when the aircraft comes in on landing, the rear wheels touch down and they don't have to spool up the differential, they actually spool it up backwards because the wheels are trying to spin up the differential instead of the engine spinning up the differential to turn the wheels. And then there's a shaft that goes back, that's interconnected, that goes from the engine back to the propeller. There were a lot of dynamic issues with that. They solved it with something called a flexible or a fluid drive. It's a powder-matic drive. It's similar to what was used in some of the engine and electric motor combinations, where you'd have an electric motor generator being driven by a gasoline engine. You got these weird vibrations, and so they had developed this coupler for that. The Aerocar itself was fairly complicated. Every time you would connect the tail and the wings, there were little interconnect switches and such, paddles to run the aileron controls, similar to the way the Grumman Wildcat used them. Anyway, it was very, very complicated. Rube Goldberg would have felt way at home, but it was very effective. It was a really good flying, very stable airplane. You got to take it into consideration. It was designed in 1948. So for that era, it was quite an airplane. So go ahead. So again, the upper left-hand corner shows the Aerocar in about 1956. And then there's two of them flying in formation. For 1956, it was very similar to the interior appointments of a car of its day. There were the controls of a car and the controls of an airplane. The steering wheel was the wheel you used to control the ailerons. It also would lock in place as you put the wings on. It would lock in place. Otherwise, you would push and pull for the elevator and turn the wheel in the air for the ailerons. And when they're on the ground, it steered the front wheels. Actually, when you're in the air flying the Aerocar, if you turn the ailerons and the wheels, the front wheels out of the car also turn at the same time. And then there's also a control stick on the right-hand side so the passenger could fly it as well. So go ahead. So all this engineering and design culminated in the airplane receiving type certification. So a lot of people think that the Aerocar is experimental. It was experimental up until 1956, where they had 4 of the Aerocars that received type certification. So go ahead, Michael. So it actually is. It is not in the Model 1 configuration. The Aerocar is a certificated airplane. It is not an experimental aircraft. So pretty big achievement. He said a lot of the things they would find as fault, he would have to basically tell the FAA. The FAA's response was, Aerocar will comply. And so they'd be like, okay, we got to figure this out, you know. And a lot of work made into this aircraft. So go ahead. So then they had the Aerocar and they wanted to sell them and get it into mass production. One of the ways they did promotion was the actor Bob Cummings, who my understanding is had flight instructor license number 1. That is my understanding. I could be wrong, but that was what I was told, is that Bob Cummings was the first person to actually have a flight instructor rating issued by I believe the CAA at the time. But he was an actor, had a TV show called The Bob Cummings Show, where he was a photographer and he would fly around. And he basically owned the Aerocar through his company, NutriBio. That was, long story, it was other controversy and such. But he owned the Aerocar and then he used it in his television show. So at the time, there were only 3 national television shows or channels. And one of them was every week showing the Aerocar. So a lot of publicity. So go ahead. Another thing was there was a gentleman named Carl Gladden, who I also had a chance to meet and work with a number of times. He lived in Michigan. He produced a toy company called Gladden, and he produced a toy, and it was widely circulated. These things go for about $500-600 on eBay right now. They're a very rare toy these days, but it's a beautiful little model of the Aerocar. It came in a model, it came in a kit form, it came in an assembled form. And then go ahead. And the other thing that was popular, this is about 1961, was KISN Radio out of Portland flew the Aerocar to do the traffic watch. And this is where Wayne Nutsch would have been flying the Aerocar. There were several other pilots, and it was involved in the Columbus Day storm. I have a write-up on that in the book. And so they so this So they so retractable wheels. So go ahead. Well, so there's a whole series of things. The Ford Motor Company showed interest, but Ford was in the throes of all of the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration rules and all the EPA guidelines and such. I could get into it and tell the whole stories there, but basically Ford was involved. I've personally talked to the former Ford CEO. I've talked to Taylor Aerocar. I've talked to a number of people and got their perspectives. The head of product development for Boeing. Some of that is written up in the book. But basically, it was a good idea. It was a really well-refined idea, but Ford was really not in. It didn't have an appetite to really develop the flying car as they would like, because they had so many other concerns just keeping the company going. So Molt turned his attention to sport aircraft. So in the lower left is an aircraft called the Coot. Richard Steves out of Madison, Wisconsin, has been writing the newsletter for the Coot for coming up on 50 years. In the upper right, where we see Jess Minnick, again, who worked with Molt for all those years. That's the Mini Imp in the foreground. And there's the prototype to the Mini Imp. Up in the attic behind him is the tail for the prototype of the Aerocar. I mean, he was doing all this work in Longview, Washington. And the way he funded it was he sold his original building and bought a building not at the airport, but closer to downtown Longview, and then took those extra funds to develop some of these Ford aircraft. So go ahead. So let's step through the Aerocar pretty quick. Go ahead. This is the Aerocar number 1, and it was actually built. They built a prototype and 4 production Aerocars. This is the Model 2. The Model 2 was a wings and tail of an Aerocar with a non-roadable cab, so you could have 4 people. You save the weight of the differential, you save the weight of the bumpers, lighter weight tires, things like that. So the Aerocar Model 2 the idea is you'd own an Aerocar, and then if you wanted to carry 4 people, you could put this different pod on the front instead of the other one, and you could fly that. So go ahead. And they built it and flew it for about 16 hours of flight time. This is the Model 3. Go ahead. And it was built and flown extensively. Go ahead. So Molt was always looking to make it bigger and better and improve it. So this was a car body that was intended to be a 6-cylinder engine, and it would be a 4-person Aerocar that would be interchangeable, the same wings and tail of an Aerocar 1. But because of the bigger engine, we have more performance and be able to carry 4 people. So go ahead. And they never built it. A lot of these things they never built. So in the upper left was another version of the styling of the car body, and in the lower right was again a more military application with multiple wheels and an amphibious car body that would mount to the existing Aerocar Model 1 wings and tail. Go ahead. He also looked at a flying Jeep. He actually designed this and showed these drawings. And go ahead, hit the enter ones. He showed this. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay.
He actually had these drawings and built this model, which is on display at the Museum of Flight, and took it with him when they took the aircraft to the Pentagon. This was what he was selling. Notice the dorsal fin all the way down in the tail. So they hadn't learned that lesson yet. So this was what they presented to the Pentagon in roughly 1948. So go ahead. And then he also looked at doing a jet engine version, a tracked turbine powered engine. Again, a military application. You would fly this into a location and then you could continue your warfighting on the ground. So go ahead. Another as designed with multiple engines. And go ahead. And this is the Model 3 as designed with multiple engines. So again, looking to get more performance and more utility out of the X or the Model 5. And tail, and then the engine in the tail section would then fly the Aerocar. So go ahead. We actually built a model. So this is a Model 1 version of with the wings from the early Model 1. So you have not the same exact wings, but the same configuration of the 3-engine. The bus without a pilot, you would drive a bus with a driver to the airport. Disconnect the bus, leave the wings there for another module to attach, and then the bus would switch to a driver and they would drive the passengers to their final destination. So go ahead. And this is a version, a more advanced version of the same concept. And there's a gentleman who built a beautiful model of this. Drawing a blank on his name right now. Drawing a blank on his name. But he, what is his name? And I felt really bad too because I had left off his name in the caption because they deleted a photo that had his name. But he is listed in the credits in the book. But he built this beautiful model of the Aero bus based on Molt Taylor's models. So hold on one second. Gotta get it. Gotta find it. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Herb Deeks out of Los Angeles. And Herb Deeks actually has a wonderful website and a lot of model components and such. If anybody ever wants to have some really quality models, Herb Deeks built this model. So go ahead. So the Aerocar towards late in life was donated to the EAA Air Museum in Oshkosh. Go ahead. I'm almost done here, by the way. I don't know how I'm doing on time. So Molt Taylor received induction into the Home Builders Hall of Fame. And in fact, he was there and he was like, I want to build an Aero bus. So he was just, he was promoting the Aero bus toward the end of his life. And it was really a neat thing to be there. It was a privilege to be there. And go ahead. And so he received his Home Built Hall of Fame statue from Paul Poberezny, who are standing up there in the upper left. And then after he received the statue and did his little talk, we said, well, Molt, there's one more thing. And so I stepped up to the podium and I said, you're going to be featured on the cover of Air and Space Smithsonian Magazine. And he just lost it. He completely lost it. He was so overcome. That's Paul Poberezny kissing him on the forehead. It was just like a standing ovation, absolutely rousing standing ovation. And go ahead. And so that's Molt Taylor and his wife Lillian at the EAA. That is him holding a mock-up of the early version of the cover in the upper right. And that is a photo down in the center, shot by EAA, the official photo of him for the EAA Hall of Fame. And unfortunately, Molt Taylor passed away 4 days later. So go ahead. So they named the airport in Longview, AKA Molt Taylor Field. They actually had a ceremony and such. And then this Mrs. Taylor is in the lower right there, and they put him into the Aviation Hall of Fame, the Washington State Aviation Hall of Fame. And so Mrs. Taylor was able to attend that and receive the award for her husband, Molt. And go ahead. And the Museum of Flight continues to own the Aerocar Model 3, and they had an ad campaign for a while that listed it as the original off-road vehicle. So kind of fun. So go ahead. We'll just talk. This is, I think, one of the final slides. So now the Aerocar, as I said, the Aerocar Model 3 is at the Museum of Flight along with a lot of the original artifacts. So go ahead. And let's talk about where they are now. There were 5 Aerocars. So this is the prototype. This is where Michael's got to keep clicking. It was restored by the Bueller Foundation in Florida, and is now at EAA. It was in flying condition. It flew for a while. Then N101 Delta, go ahead, was the aircraft that was flown in, Greg Herrick owned this in Minnesota. It then was sold recently, just last year. I do not know who the new owner is. 102 Delta was owned by Bob Cummings, go ahead. That was then purchased by a number of people and restored by Ed Sweeney in California, actually Florida at the time, but then California later. Go ahead. And 102 Delta is still owned by Ed Sweeney's son in Sacramento area, I believe. They also own the only flyable Model 2. Go ahead. And that is the Model 2 attached to that Aerocar 102 Delta. Go ahead. And then there is another Aerocar that was used for KISN radio, and that's 103 Delta. 103 Delta is, go ahead, is now owned by Marilyn Felling. And it's in the most original but unrestored condition. It's a beautiful restorable aircraft. And then, as I mentioned, 100 Delta is the Model 3, and that is at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. And so I think that's it. I think we have a picture of Molt. And so it was a privilege to know Molt Taylor. It was a privilege to be able to work with him and tell his story. I'd be open to any questions you want. It was really an amazing thing. Culminated in the book of Driving the Clouds, done, as I mentioned, in cooperation with Molt Taylor and his archives. All the proceeds, I don't have any proceeds from this. It all goes to EAA. So any money that I get from royalties, which isn't very much, goes to EAA. So if anyone's ever interested, you could get it through Amazon. I generally have 1 or 2 here at my home. I'm actually down to just 1 right now, but I have to order some more. But anyway, it was a privilege to get to know him. It was a privilege to tell his story. I've had a lot of amazing people I've been able to meet throughout the years who worked with Molt Taylor, and it was really, really a privilege to get to know him and then to tell his story. So
thanks, Jerry. That was super interesting. Did you ever? You never had a chance to fly in one of these, did you, Jake?
I did very briefly. Ed Sweeney had his Aerocar at the Museum of Flight at one point in time, and he said, if you're going to write a book about it, you need to at least fly in it. So we did a flight around the pattern at Boeing Field, and so I have probably 10 minutes in an Aerocar.
What was it like?
Well, it flew like a 1950s airplane. I mean, it's hard to compare it to something modern because it was first flown in '48 and then certified in '56. So I was flying the version from 1956, and it was a fairly underpowered, but just a very, very stable, pretty good visibility because you're out there in front of the wing, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a smile the entire time, quite sure.
What other questions you guys have out there? Unmute your microphone.
What's the ones that sold recently worth?
I do not know. I did not get the details of who they sold it to or the exact amount. I did hear rumors it was 200-ish thousand, I think, sold for. Originally, they had it advertised, and I think Marilyn Felling had hers advertised for 2.3 million or something like that. And Greg Herrick used to joke, "I know where someone could save $1 million." Yeah, if they want to buy mine for 1.3 million, I'd be glad to sell it to them. He used to joke. But I don't know the exact total. I'm sure it's on the web because it was an auction house that did it. So I imagine the sale price is available, but not necessarily the owner. If the owner wants to get a hold of me, I would love to meet the new owner and see what they may plan to do with it at some point in time.
Hey, a question came in on the chat, Jake. It says, someone attempted an Aerocar using a Pinto in the 70s. Was this any relationship?
There was no relationship directly. I know who you're speaking of, a guy named Smolinski, I believe. He took a Ford Pinto and a Cessna Skymaster, and they had at least one successful flight where they actually did fly it successfully, but then both the pilot and the builder went up and did a flight, and the carry-through strut for the wings, very similar to what you see here on the screen right now. You have the wings and then you have the wing struts. There was the failure of the carry-through strut on the body, and so the wings folded and they were both killed.
What other questions?
This is John Goble. I don't know if Bruce is on my college roommate, Bruce. We both studied engineering and out in Ohio, of all places, out in the middle of nowhere. And Bruce would talk about Molt Taylor. I mean, it would be Molt Taylor all the time. And I just didn't really put it all together, and I was focused on windsurfing. My dad was a pilot for Pan Am and United, and I just wasn't interested in flying. And so, but Bruce and I, we went to Oshkosh, or we went to Florida together. We did all kinds of crazy stuff, and Bruce's family was just an amazing large family of designers and inventors, and it was just a wonderful time I had. And so we graduated, and I went out west to go windsurfing in Portland, Oregon, of all places. And wouldn't you know it, I popped into Portland, Oregon, and it's Molt Taylor in Longview. It was hilarious. So this is a really good presentation. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. It's great that people have a connection. It's really neat to hear from people who knew him or who have some kind of a connection to the Aerocar. It's very, very popular. I mean, pretty much brings a smile to everybody's face. It's kind of fun.
Another question came in on the chat. Did Molt sell the rights to the Flexidine clutch to the appliance industry and make money on the deal?
So no, he actually had a Flexidine, which is the brand name of the Powdermatic or fluid drive. And he actually was manufactured by a company called Dodge, I believe. Not the Dodge cars, but Dodge. And there are period ads that they had the Dodge fluid coupling in the ad, and they had the Aerocar picture there. In other words, using the Aerocar to promote their fluid drive. And then later, lawyers and everybody, they were like, we do not support or in any way endorse the use of our coupler in an aviation, So I thought it was ironic at how the world had changed, that early on they used the Aerocar to promote their fluid drive, and then later on they were explicitly, decried the use of their fluid drive in an Aerocar. But it is, as part of the Aerocar, it is a certified aircraft using that fluid drive. And as far as I know, Molt did not have any connection to those rights or patents of the fluid drive. He used them. They were used in, as I mentioned, the generators, between generators and gas motors, and they also were used in the helicopter industry to help dampen the vibrations through a long shaft.
I see a couple other microphones coming on. Dave?
Yeah. Just for what it's worth, I have a brother-in-law that lives up in Longview, and as a kid, he hung around Molt Taylor's shop and ended up getting his pilot's license, but doesn't fly now. But he he does talk about how much he learned, and he ended up becoming a car mechanic and owning probably the biggest shop in the Longview area.
Oh, nice, Dave. Yeah, he said for a while they put up a sign on the freeway that said Longview, home of the Aerocar, and he said after about a week they had to take it down. He said because so many people were coming by his shop, he couldn't get any work done.
Hey, Jake, you've done this.
FYI, if anybody's interested, Fiddler's Green makes a paper model of the Aerocar that you can download and cut out and construct into a nice little paper model that doesn't look too bad. I've seen one or two of them in my time, but if anybody's interested in having their own little Aerocar paper model, I can make the file available. Comes in 2 pages, and you just cut it out, glue it together, and you got your own Aerocar.
Nice. Bruce, you had a question there too.
Yeah, Jake, have you given this talk at Oshkosh? It'd probably be one they'd like.
I actually did. The year that the book came out, which was 2006, I did a talk at the EAA Museum. It was a pretty small group. There were maybe 45 people, maybe. Oshkosh was going on at the time, but of course Oshkosh was not at the museum. But they had a whole series of talks. It was really nice. I ended up following Cliff Robertson, and so he and I ended up talking for a while backstage, and then he went out and gave his talk, and then I gave my talk on the Aerocar. So I had a really nice chance to spend about 10 minutes just one-on-one with Cliff Robertson, and that was a real treat. It was really cool.
You should do this presentation on. I mean, maybe EAA has a presentation that you can do this, because this was much more than I had no idea about all these different cars. It's amazing.
Okay, yeah, that I am willing to do that. I know they have a program of interviewing people, but this is sort of. I mean, I'm not the person. I'm the person who did the biography as opposed to the person. So I'd certainly be willing to do that, and. It would be a privilege. It's nice to be able to tell his story and keep it going. I've done a lot of publicity. Whenever the Museum of Flight gets a phone call from somebody, they say, "Well, just talk to Jake." So I've done a lot of. I did a Mysteries at the Museum. If you look up Mysteries at the Museum, there's a YouTube video of me doing the talk on the Aerocar briefly. But one of the reasons, Michael, as you said, you had not known about some of these. One of the reasons I wanted to do the book was because I had never, as I was going through his files, I had never seen a 3-engine version or a helicopter version or an auto gyro version. I mean, all these different concepts. And I thought, boy, somebody should do something, because here's not just the story of what really happened, but all the things he wanted to do in addition. And so that was one of the impetuses to doing the book.
Any other questions? I probably should have told you this, Jake. Maybe you saw it in the corner, but we did record it, and we will post it up on our website. So if you know somebody who would like to see this, you can certainly refer them back to our website and tell them they can go watch it if they'd like. So it will be available, someday when I just re-render it and get it over to our website, guys. So if there's no other questions, we'll put a wrap on this. Going once? Going twice?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm planning on taking my RV to Oshkosh this year. If there's anybody who has some insight into that, maybe they can contact me somehow.
Okay, hold on. Are you flying an RV or driving that kind of RV?
Oh, sorry. I'm going to bring my RV trailer. Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Just fly in like everybody else.
Yeah, no, I'm going to bring my RV trailer behind my little pickup.
Talk to Ernie. Ernie has done that religiously for years and years, and I'm sure he can give you the pointers.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I'll give Ernie a call.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. What a great meeting. Jake, thanks so much for putting this on. A great presentation. And again, it's a pleasure to see everybody. Can't wait to see people face to face here in a couple of months. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. And take care, fly safe, and we'll be seeing everybody next month for our KR2 presentation. Take care now. Have a good week.
Thanks. Great meeting.
All right. Bye-bye.